Check one, check two. Welcome to Mindfulness Off the Cushion. If you're familiar with the challenges of living mindfully and are looking for help in your daily dance with suffering, our goal is to be a resource for you. So let's jump straight in to Mindfulness Off the Cushion, brought to you by the Austin Mindfulness Center. Welcome to Mindfulness Off the Cushion, episode 6. This week, we're going to talk about gratitude, what it is, why it's important, and how it's related to mindfulness. And of course, as we like to do on this podcast, how to do it, how to be grateful in our daily lives. But first, our co-hosts have a little something that they would like to share with you from this last week.
It's a coordinated dance. So, Christina, kick us off.
Okay. Well, I decided to pick one that's out of the orthodox in regards to scientific-based mindfulness, but I am reading this book that my friend Suzanne West let me borrow, and it's called Birds in Your Backyard. And it is about, obviously, the study of ornithology and birds. And I guess how it's related to mindfulness is just that recent study that had come out that stated that people who watch birds have the same amount of neurochemicals, specifically dopamine, as individuals who've gotten a raise at their job. And so since this has inspired me to start paying attention a little bit more to the birds in my backyard, and even so started making a little bit of a bird sanctuary on my outdoor space.
That's awesome.
Beautiful.
Well, my book is not as exciting. My book, every once in a while, I think last time I talked about needing brain candy, and I go back to Hector and the Search for Happiness as one of my books. But right now, it's not necessarily in the world of mindfulness, but I don't know if anybody was watching House when it used to come on, and it was super popular. But this is House, the Wounded Healer on television, Jungian and post-Jungian reflection. So it's still like a psychology nerd book, but it's just different essays written about House as if he were a real live individual through the lens of like the Jungian theoretical perspective. It's super interesting and very fascinating. And it's just a good way to kind of appeal to my pop culture obsession while also feeling like I'm doing something remotely academic. And I love it. So highly recommend it. It's a very interesting book, especially if you liked the show House.
So I think I took the assignment way too seriously because you guys are having a lot of fun with your assignment. I decided to kind of come back to a book that I've been reading over a couple of years now. And it's called In Buddha's Words. It's an anthology of discourses from the Pali Canon. And it's by Bhikkhu Bodhi. And there's this one section in it. It's called The Vicissitudes of Life. And I had to look up what vicissitudes were. Because it's such an interesting word and I did not know what it was. And it's just, essentially, it's the alteration between opposites or contrasting things. So in the paragraph, here's the Buddha speaking to monks. And he says, these 8 worldly conditions, monks, keep the world turning around. And the world turns around these 8 worldly conditions: gain and loss, fame and disrepute, praise and blame, pleasure and pain. So those 8 vicissitudes are gain and loss, fame and disrepute, praise and blame, and pleasure and pain. And why it has stuck with me so much throughout the years is because it's really allowed me to bring a lot of awareness to when these vicissitudes are happening in my life, and to recognize them as such, and to recognize the impermanent nature of them, how they come and how they go. And it's fascinating to see, in particular, for me, I've been paying a lot of attention about fame and disrepute, and how in popular culture, we tend to hold up certain figures, and how through time, many of those figures that we give a lot of fame to, eventually that fame comes to an end. I don't know. I've always I found this to be very helpful for me throughout the years.
Cool. Thank you for sharing. I stole a book from my wife's bookshelf about ACT, or acceptance and commitment therapy. A particular portion of this book, it was talking about how our thinking mind is very much like a radio playing in the background. And no matter how hard we try, we can never turn it off. However, I think many of us have had the situation or the circumstance where we've had the radio playing in the background, but our focus or our intention was elsewhere. And maybe at some point we even forgot the radio was playing in the background. And that's very much what, from what I understand about mindfulness, has to do with like the thinking mind and the relationship that we have with the thinking mind. Now let's get back to this episode 6, gratitude. Let's start super simple and define it.
Wow.
Ooh. I'd say maybe it's a simple act of, people, the coinage of the attitude of gratitude. So sometimes I think it's an attitude that we can have about kind of going through the life, going through our daily lives, coming from a gracious place. And then maybe idea of what it is to practice gratitude, taking time out of a day, if you had not been in the zone of gratitude, to acknowledge things that we are grateful for. And I believe that also obviously helps with a lot of mental health conditions regarding anxiety and depression, et cetera, especially in direct correlation with, balancing automatic negative thoughts. Something like gratitude really helps when you're able to name some of the positives in the world or in your daily life, even though that can be a little hostile sometimes to do or difficult to do. But even to do that kind of helps remind the brain that we are more balanced than we probably think we are in the moment.
What did you say? Something about a frame of mind?
Mm-hmm.
I like that. It's not like necessarily like an action, like you were always like practicing gratitude as much as that's just your understanding of your being in the world or your perception of everything. Because that kind of goes along with a more proactive form of like non-striving. Like if you're constantly striving for more or to do more or to buy more or to experience more, then you're not necessarily also simultaneously able to practice like gratitude. It's also difficult because it's like those thought experiments we had to do in school where it's like define this concept without using the word in the definition. So like trying to explain this in a way where I'm not using the term gratitude, but essentially that's what it is. You're being grateful for or thankful for, or at least being mindful of and accepting everything that you have and not striving for more. You can still have goals. You can still have objectives. You could still have your eye on the prize, but not putting all of your happiness eggs in that basket alone. And I think that's something that a lot of people do is we lose sight of what we've already accomplished or what we have when we're constantly focusing on that next step. I remember experiencing that like when I finished my bachelor's degree. It's like that should have been this huge accomplishment because not a lot of people have that ability to do it or have that privilege to attend a university. But my immediate thought on graduation day was, well, crap, now I got to apply for my master's because there's very limited things I can do with the bachelor's in psychology. And then I finished my master's and I'm like, well, crap, now I got to sit for the NCE. And then I sat for the NCE. Well, crap, now I have 3,000 clinical supervision hours. And there's always like pushing it. And there was never that time to just sit and be grateful for the experiences and the accomplishments I've already have. So the less striving that we do, the more that we can practice this gratitude.
As I try to contemplate the meaning of gratitude, I contemplate upon 3 words. The first word that comes to mind is stopping, pausing. So this ability or capacity that we can cultivate to pause amidst the stream, the never-ending stream of things. And then there's seeing, this understanding that we can bring to the moment and recognize the moment for what it is. Many times that moment can be in our control. Many times that moment is out of our control, but it is here nonetheless. So it involves stopping. It involves seeing. And then it also involves receiving. So in this understanding of gratitude, it's definitely an orientation of receiving the experience, receiving the moment, not so much this mentality of taking.
It reminds me of a Tibetan quote: when we're grateful for something that someone else has or does, that becomes part of us. And so that might speak to that receiving that you're speaking to, Claudio.
I think that there is something when we unexpectedly receive a gift from somebody. I think that that definitely creates the conditions for gratitude. I think that there is a connection there. The most important thing about this act of gratitude, that from my understanding, is making sure that we check this world that we live in of implicit expectations that we have about our day-to-day lives and about the causes and conditions that bring about our reality. There's a lot of implicit expectations at times. And I think that when we practice gratitude, we tend to perhaps pull back from implicit expectations and move into this space of receiving.
Yeah. Well, something you were saying that really resonated with me in regards to, I think you used the word stream or even streaming, as we're literally streaming a podcast as we speak, but kind of synonymous with our flow state and trying to get into that idea of our flow state that just seems sort of organic and freeing. And so I also went through this sort of domino effect, if you will, of gratitude to appreciation. And then the objective nature of appreciation is sort of understanding or just knowledge. Yeah. And then that leading to insight. And then that's it. I don't want to say period, end of sentence, because likely it probably cycles around, but as flow does. And then the other thing you were saying about the Tibetan quote almost is kind of like, I don't mean to culturally inappropriate the term namaste, but it's more of like the magic in me recognizes the magic in you, and vice versa. And so I think that there is a lot of gratitude in that observation, right? In order to kind of see other people's enlightenments, but also see how that sort of enlightens us up as well.
I like that. That's even reflected in Christianity too, right? Where the Bible talks about that we were created in God's image, and it can't be exactly the same, because if we just saw God in each other, then we would just like be bowing down and worshiping every time we met a new person. But to treat each other with that same gratitude that we would treat like this deity that created us, right? And it's cool that that's like present in both like Eastern and Western religions, the sense of we should be grateful for time that we spend together. And that's not something that we're often grateful for. I think it's easy to practice gratitude when somebody does something for you, or gives you a gift, or gives you something, or enhances your experience. But we don't think about being ninjas in gratitude of like, I'm going to be grateful that you've donated your time just to sit here and drink coffee with me. I'm going to be grateful for you coming over instead of just, calling me over the phone. Like, time is such a precious commodity. We have very little time. Like in our lifetime, we have a finite amount of time. And if we're choosing to spend some of that time with somebody, that is something to be grateful for. But we typically don't express that gratitude, or we take it for granted that, it's just us hanging out. There's not much there. But I think that also comes with balance, right? Because we can be grateful for any number of things. Like, I'm going to be grateful for this gift, but I also have to be grateful for the person that gave me the gift. But I also have to be grateful for the people that had their hands on this gift and constructed this thing, and all of the hands that touch from getting the materials to creating it to coming to me. So it can really be easy to go down this, like, I don't know, grateful rabbit hole. But I think just bringing in this like lens of mindfulness to every experience because you really can't have gratitude without mindfulness, right? You have to be aware, you have to be connected to the experience or the gift or the service to be able to be grateful for. So the more that we're connected, the more that we can appreciate even the most mundane of things. I was re-listening to past episodes, and I used the example of being sore that day because I had a tough workout like the day before. Even something that's usually something annoying, it's like, oh, I'm going to be grateful for this because that means I didn't waste time working out. Like, I tore some muscles and rebuilding new muscles. So that was productive. So the more that, you practice gratitude when it's easy, the more that you can do it when it's not as clear, because there's people that say that the opposite of depression is gratitude. Because if we're depressed, then we're just focusing on all the negatives, all that's going wrong, all that we don't have, all that's missing. But when we can reframe that into things that we are grateful for, because you will never be in a place where you have absolutely nothing. There's always going to be resources. There's always going to be opportunity. There's always going to be potential for change or potential for learning. And so there's always that opportunity for gratitude.
There's also that journaling exercise, right? The grateful piece for gratitude journaling is like listing 100 things that you are grateful for. And, most people, depending on our mind, mindset that day, it's like, there's no way I can come up with 100 things. But then when you start doing it, you start actually, in my experience anyway, starting to become more grateful about the things you're grateful for, and starts yielding tons and tons of different things. So I just wanted to say as well that sometimes the gratitude can seem limited without actually doing the exercise around gratitude. And then I think it actually just yields more gratitude.
I found the phrase that you used, Patrick, you said that going down this rabbit hole of gratefulness, right? It's never ending. It can be never ending. And I say that that's actually one of the most amazing things about gratitude is that it is free and it is infinite as long as we have the capacity to understand the interdependent nature of like this moment right here, right now. What would happen to our mind-body system if we dwelled more time in that rabbit hole of gratitude, of understanding that no matter how confusing this moment may be, or how frustrating this moment may be, or how sad this moment may be, that there is still a lot more right with it than wrong with it. And that in of itself can provide, I think, a lot of healing and a lot of insight, and also create the future conditions for more gratitude to flourish in our lives. If there is one rabbit hole that I want to go down more and more in my day, perhaps that's the rabbit hole that I want to dwell more in. And what would that? And what would it mean? What would be the response of that, the significance of that, the effect of that in my life?
Yeah, help me understand, why is it a rabbit hole, and why, maybe the answer is we do want to try to go down that rabbit hole, visit the rabbit hole for 10, 15 minutes a day and practice that gratitude. Why don't we just want to dwell there?
The idea of a rabbit hole, though, is also getting lost, right? So it's not just being in a place that feels safe and exploratory. The idea of that rabbit hole feels lost. So I can say from a clinical perspective, I can be the Debbie Downer who talks about interactions with my clients, that when we have gone down that rabbit hole of gratitude, how it has turned into something very different that didn't seem as calm. And I'm going to bring up different pieces of like invalidation, for example. If you're asking someone to be like, make sure you're thinking about what you're grateful for, that can sometimes come off as invalidating for individuals who are wanting to be seen in what they are struggling with right now. And they haven't come to a place yet to embrace gratitude as an objective way. It seems like it can be triggering of like, let's just concentrate on the good.
Right.
So again, that's my, Debbie Downer opposite version of how that could have consequences.
Yeah, I think it goes to like the intention of the rabbit hole. Like if you are trying to, last week we talked about savoring. If you are trying to savor a meal while practicing gratitude and exploring like how many things can I be grateful for, then you're going to lose the experience of savoring the meal. Like if you're trying to sit down a meal and then you start thinking about, oh, this came from this restaurant, that came from this produce company, that came from this shipping company, that came from this country. Well, now you just ate your whole meal worrying about like the chain of that. And chances are at some point you stopped and picked up your phone to Google, like, where does fruit come from and where is rice grown? And that's kind of taken away from the experience and kind of beyond the scope of what you're trying to accomplish with gratitude, with savoring. And especially people with like active brains or prone to anxiety, you're going to go down all of these rabbit holes that really aren't fruitful, and there's no benefit to doing. It's a cool thought experiment. Like there's website, I didn't know this. You can track like where your eggs came from and where your cows were raised, where they milked them. Like you can find all of this information, but again, like, are you doing it out of curiosity or to learn new things or to savor and practice gratitude? I do think it would be a dope focus for meditation. Like if you needed something to manifest or explore a little bit more, like seeing how much of a ninja of gratitude you can be by going down these rabbit holes. I think that would be fruitful. And I think that would be a good thought experiment to really practice more detailed gratitude for any given thing, whether it's like a gift, going back to where the materials were collected to how it reached you. But if you're trying to do it in the moment to enhance the experience, then that's where I feel like it'll be distracting.
This podcast is sponsored by the Austin Mindfulness Center, the premier mental health counseling center in Texas for mindfulness-based therapy, education, and coaching. If you're an individual or couple struggling with stress, anxiety, depression, relationship issues, or you're just looking to better equip yourself to gracefully navigate these turbulent times, you can visit us online at austinmindfulness.org and request an appointment today. Now let's get back to our podcast.
And I think that you nailed it right there, the difference between going down the rabbit hole and not knowing that you're caught up in the rabbit hole versus just recognizing that, yes, this is a rabbit hole, and just pausing there. You touched on something as well, like this capacity that we could have in our formal meditation practice, if you wanted to, in the words of Patrick, be a ninja and use a gratitude ninja, use the thinking mind as a mode or a pathway to understand gratitude more insightfully. Not all meditations are just about focusing on the breath or focusing on the body. There are certain meditations that they use the power of the thinking mind skillfully. And I think that this can be an example of that if you wanted to practice that and just be able to anchor the mind or anchor the thinking mind in just thoughts of gratitude or interconnectedness. I think for me, I use the word rabbit hole playfully, but for me, it's understanding the interdependence of the moment. And I think that we have an opportunity to bring that awareness that this moment came about due to conditions and causes that were in my control, that I had something to do with it, but also due to causes and conditions that were not in my control.
I guess if I had a point about gratitude amongst all of this, again, it's kind of like my objective nature of the concept, and that we kind of assume, I assume, okay, we're going to be grateful, we're going to be happy about everything we have. But then obviously the objective nature of it, which is kind of recognizing what is part of us or what is in our daily experience as a sort of way of appreciating. And so again, if we go back to the example of the food that we're chatting about, if we were to go down a rabbit hole in regards to where this food is coming from, et cetera, I too have gone down that rabbit hole then to turn into, well, then I need to be extra grateful, right? And this eliciting this feeling of guilt of, I need to be extra grateful that other people don't have access to this kind of foods. And so for a second I hit a moment of guilt, but then it comes back to gratitude for me in both the realization of that. And it actually has, I think for me, intensified my appreciation and gratitude towards those things when you find out the source. And then I can continue from that of like gratitude is questionably digging into your source and tapping into the knowing and the source of what helps us exist in a very existential, humanly way.
But I think that reminder of privilege is 100% necessary for gratitude, because that's how we become aware of the fact that this is something to be grateful for. We can wake up and be grateful for waking up and for having a home and for, all of these things that are like really obvious privileges that we have in our life, but things that we take for granted, like shoes or clothes, like that might not be on your top 10 list of things that you're practicing gratitude for. But until you travel to other impoverished countries or parts of the world and you see people suffering without those things, then it reminds you of the privilege of them. And then you're like, oh crap, yeah, let me add that to the gratitude list because that is something I'm grateful for. I shared in a previous episode that experience in jail where we had just absolutely nothing. And I don't remember if I shared, but like you get breakfast at 4:30 in the morning, you get lunch at 11:30, and then you get dinner at 4:30 in the afternoon, and then you get no food after that. And the portions are very small, and it's very alarming to be hungry and to have nothing that you can do about it. But then as soon as we got our commissary and like could buy snacks and hygiene stuff, then it was like Christmas Day. And it's like, holy crap, I didn't realize how privileged I've been in my life to not hunger for food or to not know where my next food meal is going to come from, or even like can change anything that would get me food faster. And so that really changed my relationship with food and just like basic necessities like that. But again, that comes with the exposure of being reminded of these privileges to be able to do that. Because it doesn't serve an evolutionary purpose, right? Like we need these things to survive. Like when we were tribal communities, we needed food. We needed to forage and hunt and eat food. There was not a lot of time to stop and be thankful for it. But now that we've like kind of evolved to this point of society where we need to enhance our experience and quiet down distractions and stop striving for things. So this is where gratitude really kicks in. I'm curious, as just like a thought experiment, like what to y'all is like the purpose of gratitude? Like if you were trying to explain it to an alien that came and visited our planet and they're like, what's this thing of gratitude? Like, why does this exist? Like, how would y'all approach that subject?
I feel like it comes back to suffering and the fact that almost by definition, perhaps by being human, there is that suffering, there is unhappiness, often because we're clinging to an outcome or we're striving for something. And it's difficult for us to live in the moment and be okay with it. And so therefore, gratitude is important because if we're not grateful or appreciating something or thankful for something, then our life would be 100% suffering. So we need at least 1% or 2% of something else. And that is not coming from any clinical research or knowledge on my part. So
that sounds like the antidote to suffering. The antidote to suffering is gratitude. I don't know, trying to explore that way. I think that you're spot on by understanding what the nature of the human condition is. And the nature of the human condition is that there is a lot of, discontentment, unsatisfactoriness, suffering, stress. I'm saying stress is just the modern day word for suffering. There is something to that as our lives have become more complex in some ways, and our cultures and societies have gotten more complex in some ways. There tends to be less gratitude going around. There's a lot more expectations, implicit expectations going around, but a lot less gratitude. I think that in these older times, and if you go back 100 years, or if you just look at cultures that are not caught up in so much in the complexities of modern society, I think that there is a different understanding or a much more direct access to gratitude in those cultures, because they're grateful not for all the things that they have, but for the very few things that they do have, which provide their ability to live.
That reminds me of, I have this tattoo. I don't know if I've showed it on the podcast, but it's a frog in a well based on the parable of like the frog in the well knows nothing of the great ocean, where the turtle comes and it's like, what are you doing down there? And the frog's like, I have everything I need. It's cool. There's bugs and water. You should come chill here. And the turtle's like, have you seen the ocean? Because it's like that times infinity. But there's like two different versions. And the gratitude version is like, even awareness of the ocean doesn't take away from the fact that the frog has everything in this well. Like you don't need to ask for more when all of your needs are already met. So the frog is able to practice gratitude, even with the awareness and exposure that there's more out there. And I feel like that takes some intention, because I don't know about y'all, but I'll get on Amazon and I was like, I didn't know I needed this. I didn't know I needed this. And then I just get really bummed. I'm like, ooh, my bank account doesn't need this. But there's this sense of like, we don't even know we need things until we see them, or we don't really, it's wants, not even needs. But that need didn't arise until you were made aware that this thing existed. Because before, you were very content doing this, or you were very content chopping vegetables by hand instead of this cool, sexy thing called the slap chop, or whatever. There's any number of things that just like catch our attention that just like maybe makes life like 0.01% easier. And all of a sudden we just absolutely need it, when before we were perfectly content. So I think being mindful of, as our awareness grows of the more and more that's out there, and not getting caught up in the, oh, but I don't have that, but I don't have that comparison, because that's what's going to create that suffering.
Yeah. So I wanted to bring up too, like just to give a little bit more of a global perspective of like, this is one of my favorite words in Italian, which is gratitude, which is riconoscenza, which means recognizing your acknowledgements. It's like something as simple as that. And we've been talking about this in a lot of different ways, but just knowing that that gets translated literally and figuratively into lots of different cultures. The riconoscenza of recognizing our acknowledgements, I think is pretty powerful. And then going back to the alien metaphor of like, what would I would tell an alien, which is hard because you have to like unlock your PFC and just your prefrontal cortex kind of have to cut it off. So it's hard. But there's a quote from Aesop that says, gratitude turns what we have into enough. Another abstract term, but also, you know, another one by Melody Beattie, which is one of my favorites, about gratitude unlocks the fullness of life. And so to an alien, I would say, you see everything that's going on. You see all this busyness that's happening. You see us working and doing all these things to survive. Gratitude is the opposite of that, or acknowledging that we are doing things to survive and feeling grateful for, but also gratitude really takes, I think, a bit of ego out of survival.
Yeah, bringing ego into it is huge. I think that's why living in a capitalistic society, like they prey on ego, because otherwise, like, why wouldn't we just have one vehicle that like works? Or like, here's 3 different types. Here's a small little car, cool little SUV, big truck, boom. But no, like there's always going to be, oh, your truck is that size. Well, my truck is this size. Or, oh, you're going to get a new car. Or, oh, you're just still driving the same car from 10 years ago. Like, how often do people buy new cars when their old car is perfectly functional? Like, you are no longer practicing that gratitude when you're making these comparisons. And when we're making comparisons, it's very ego driven. It's like, oh, what are they going to think of me with their stuff compared to my stuff? Or the new iPhone comes out. Every time that happens, like all of a sudden everyone needs a new phone. And they're like, that is absolutely ego driven. How often do you actually need to get a cell phone?
But also when you're talking about the frog and the turtle, if you can, it's almost like the egotistical turtle of being like, look at this gigantic ocean, not to kind of like pull that apart, because I'm not too familiar with that, but you obviously notice in that metaphor that frog is like incredibly appreciative of what they have. And it's almost like the turtle almost introduced ego of like, well, there's so much more. But I say that, you know, to say, especially in if we're talking about capitalism as well, some people that have lots of things, currency, money, etc., are sometimes not as grateful as we would think. And that's not to bash people with lots of resources. It's just to say that in that endeavor of that ego intention of hustle, you barely have time to be grateful. And so sometimes, you know, as we're chatting about the means in which we do this, I think that plays a big difference on different scales.
I just utter the words of a wise person: more money, more problems. Chris Rock.
Yeah, baby.
Right? Baby.
That wasn't Notorious B.I.G.
I'm saying if there's a direct correlation between money and practicing gratitude, then the richest people in the world would be the most gracious people in the world. And I don't think that that's true. I don't think that there is that correlation. And I think that most people understand that that's not a correlation there. Again, going back to this, gratitude is free. It doesn't cost us anything to be gracious. Net, the gain in practicing gratitude is huge. So why don't we practice enough? Why don't we practice more of it? Because we get caught up. And that's where I think that the pausing or the stopping is necessary. The reconocimiento, the recognizing, right? That's huge. That's not like a small potato. That's big stuff right there.
And we can come up with something that's not even related to currency, just something that we can all experience on a daily basis, like the moon. And everywhere around the world where we can be grateful for acknowledging that the moon comes out every night and we can see it sometimes if it's clear, but we still know beyond those clouds that we see it. We can be grateful knowing that it is keeping our ecosystem related. Likewise, we can say that with the sun. Likewise, we can say that with something that is not necessarily directly giving us something that we're benefiting from or even exploiting, but just being able to universally be grateful for acknowledging that, yeah, the sun will come up and the moon will come up, God willing, every day.
Mm-hmm.
I like what Claudia was getting at is that like gratitude is not a luxury. Like I'll be grateful when I have this or when I have the opportunity to be grateful, when in reality, like it could start today. Like you don't need anything to be able to look around and begin to appreciate what you have.
It's almost like gratitude is a superhero or a superpower, let's just say, because it is available to all of us all the time. But if we can accomplish being okay with right now and things are fine or good enough, and that brings us that contentment, and the contentment brings us happiness, then sure, gratitude is a superpower, is it not?
Yeah, because it takes some introspection. It takes some kind of like cognitive reframing or mental maneuvering. Like I've had several clients that have, certain attachment styles that make them believe that their value comes from romantic relationships. So they're constantly striving and they're only happy when they're in relationships, and and when they're not in relationships that they're suffering or they're depressed. And then we'll talk and it's like, okay, well, what needs are not being met? Like, what do you get out of a relationship? And it's like, well, love and belonging and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, you still have friends, right? It's like, yeah, but then it comes with this. And it's like, well, is it like the physical intimacy? Is it sex that you're missing? Like we're a pretty sex positive society now. If you want to have sex, you could probably go find somebody to have sex with. No, it's not that. It's like somebody, to open up to and tell my problems to. And it's like, don't you have siblings and friends? Like we get sidetracked with, there's only one thing that I could be grateful for. And unless I have it, then I can't be grateful for it, instead of doing that mental gymnastics of, oh, like I have things to be grateful for. That's what I was saying about like, I'll be grateful when, or I'll be able to appreciate this if, but yeah, like it does take some introspection. It does take some patience and some mental maneuvering to be able to realize that, yeah, I might have goals or I might want this in my life, but that doesn't mean that I don't already have this in my life, or that doesn't mean that I'm not already getting my needs met in my life.
So maybe we could go there, Patrick, from what you just said. It makes me think about, many of us have commented on the fact that gratitude is there, it's available. And yet, just speaking from my own experience, I'm often not grateful. I'm not someone who has a gratitude journaling practice, even though I know I should, right? Quote unquote. Why, if gratitude is in fact there and available and potentially super powerful, why do we not leverage it on a more regular basis?
Don't forget to not shit on yourself, Lance. That's your quote. That's your. Well, I mean, I obviously with every answer on this podcast, there's many answers, but I would say that sometimes we forget how it works, or we forget that the positive effect it has on us. Some of us will come back to the practice, right? Like that in a previous episode, practice, doing something for 66 days to make a change. So I think one part of it is that we get preoccupied. And some people, either we think that we don't have time for it, or we refuse to make the time because we forget about the benefits that it could have for us.
When we think of evolution, we think of just like biological or physiological like attributes that have evolved over time, depending on our circumstances and environment. But we've also evolved internally and psychologically. Our brain, Christina was talking about the prefrontal cortex, which is like one of the youngest parts of the brain that's evolved over time. That when we were, I don't know what our predecessors were, but when we were less evolved, like forms of our human selves, we didn't necessarily have that. Like when you wanted something, you'd try to go find somebody smaller that you can beat up and take it from them. If you felt harmed or threatened, then you would just go and like fight that person. But we no longer do that. We talk it out. We go to therapy. We go to couples counseling. Like if we had not evolved psychologically, our society would look so much different than it did. And now we're at a point where this is the next evolutionary trait that we need to evolve to, is like not only a sense of mindfulness, but gratitude specifically, because I think, again, back in hunter-gatherer times, like it was your benefit to have more in case there was a storm, in case there was a freeze, in case somebody came and took your things. Like having more represented a higher chance for survival. So that's why there's research going into like the evolutionary traits of like hoarding, because there is like the survival mentality of I need more to ensure survival. And sometimes that has just like turned to pathological, or we just keep buying stuff impulsively. But I think once we've taken this next step of evolution psychologically, where we can practice more mindfulness, be here now, not always thinking of, I need to get this done, I need to get this done, I need to prepare, I need to do that, and just start enjoying life, because we're at that point in technology and civilization. Like we've made being inside super comfortable. Like we don't have to worry about natural disasters as much. Like the average fluctuations of the weather is fine. Like we're good. We can just coast for the remainder of civilization. But we need to turn off that part of our brain that tells us like, nope, do more to survive, do more to survive.
If there's one thing that the last year and a half or 20 months have taught us, is that perhaps the world is not okay, meaning that in a very quick in a quick period of time, the world can look vastly different than it has ever looked in the lifetime, in my lifetime, in 100 years, whatever you want to say. The reasons why we don't practice as much gratitude as perhaps we could practice is because there is this implicit expectations that we have that the world will continue as it has in our comfortable lives, and I'm saying comfortable lives, but I think that there's also a lot of people that don't have those comfortable lives. And I think that they are constantly being exposed to environmental factors that make it more difficult for them to practice this sense of gratitude. I think that in Maslow's hierarchy, I think this sense of gratitude is something that, you need to make sure that you have enough food and shelter in order for us to move in that direction of gratitude, perhaps.
I think a piece to add to this too is maybe even our past conversations around mindfulness and meditation, around some perceptions around judgment, around what is the benefit of gratitude. Show me the science. And obviously we know now the science is out, but some people kind of need to see that concrete reassurance, quote unquote, to know that that it's worth doing. Again, big air quotes around worth. This is based on our worth, based on hearing someone that we are witnessing that they feel they are worthy of, to be able to adopt that. And so I think a part of that judgment also has to do with vulnerability around the process, and exploring what that may be, whether the science is popular or not. In other words, it can be considered, maybe at this point in our time, radical to practice gratitude regularly, especially given the situations and the threats. And then that can also be broken down by where we are in the world.
Bringing up the scientific lens is good, because I think it's easy to get caught up in like the philosophical, like all of the fluffy, like, yeah, the world would be better if you practice gratitude and it'll change all these things. But there are significant cognitive barriers to being able to practice gratitude. So again, I also said that like you'll be able to know what classes I'm teaching based on what comes out of my mouth on this podcast. But when we're looking at like the cognitive perspective of psychology, there are people's defaults that are more optimistic and more pessimistic. And really, those are going to pose significant barriers to your ability to even begin to practice gratitude until you address those underlying concerns. So if there's something like past trauma, past experience, something more physiological or genetic predisposition, if there's something getting in the way that's making you just naturally pessimistic, then you really aren't going to be able to take that next step of gratitude, because everything is going to be reflected back or compared back to the negative, everything that could go wrong. It's like, yeah, I enjoy this, but it's temporary. Yes, I'm thankful for this meal, but it's going to end. Or yes, I'm thankful for this meal, but it costs $20. There's always going to be that negative. And until you can tackle that underlying issue, not just put a Band-Aid on it, because that's kind of a Western medicine approach of let's suppress the symptom. Like, ooh, you're gearing towards the negative. Let's introduce more gratitude. And that might work situationally, but holistically, you're still going to have that negative appraisal of most things. So until you can really get in there and tackle the underlying issue driving the negativity in your life, then all of these band-aids are going to be meaningless. Like all of these forcing yourself to practice gratitude isn't going to mean that much in the grand scheme of things, like at that macro level of overall happiness. So if you do find yourself struggling to practice gratitude on a daily basis, then you might need to take a bigger step back and borrowing from like a systemic view, what part of the machine or what part of the puzzle is preventing you from really excelling in this area of gratitude?
Perhaps we could speak to someone who is struggling with being grateful. Patrick, you mentioned, I think, forcing yourself to be grateful. For those who maybe are just struggling to be grateful on a daily basis, is there anything that we can tell them to mentor them to help them along the way?
There's this old sketch with Bob Newhart, who plays a therapist. I don't know if y'all have seen it, where somebody comes in, he's like, I typically only have just one session and it lasts 5 minutes. And you tell me your problems. And then she opens up and he's like, okay, you ready? Are you ready? Okay. Stop it. Just stop it. Like, I think if you have a very novice, inexperienced, like mindfulness coach, they might just say like, just keep doing it, do it and fake it until you make it. You'll do it. But that's going to be damaging, because if they keep hitting brick walls to their progress, then there's that sense of learned helplessness is going to kick in and be like, ooh, there's just something inherently wrong with me that I can't do this, or mindfulness just isn't me, or I just suck at life. If you are struggling with mindfulness and you're finding yourself forcing it, that's not a reason to give up. That's a reason to look under the hood. What is causing you to force it? Like, this is good information. Like, this is a symptom. This isn't a reason to give up or the problem. This is a symptom of a problem. So let's dig deeper and find out why you feel like you're forcing it. What's getting in the way? What's stopping you from being able to do this easily? I mean, there's going to be barriers, right? Like, it's a new skill, so you have to practice it and you have to acquire the skill. And you also have to remember to do it, because this is going to take some intention to practice gratitude. It's like if I said, hey, count how many times you blink during the day, you're going to have to remember to count how many times you're blinking, because as soon as you forget, you're going to miss all those blinks. So there's the sense of like, it's going to take some time to cultivate this practice. But if there are significant barriers, then, go to counseling. Maybe there's something. So Claudio has used the term implicit expectations a while. The implicit is implied. Like, it's not explicit expectations. Like, I expect my day to unfold like this. Implicit's that unstated, like, this is just kind of what I feel like is going to happen, even if I haven't said it out loud. So when we have that disconnect, then it needs like further exploration. So counseling is a good place to start. Coaching could also be a beneficial place. Learning more, maybe you don't have all the information and you're approaching gratitude in maybe not the most like efficient or effective way. Or even starting small. Like, if you're trying to dive in and just be a black belt in gratitude, then you're setting the bar pretty high. Like, we have, clinically, we call it success by approximations. Like, let's take baby steps. Let's break it down to reasonable and manageable steps so that we can one day be that black belt in gratitude. So gratitude journals are super dope. You don't even have to do it narrative style, just bullet points. What are you grateful for? Hit the low hanging fruit first. I'm grateful for my family, my friends, my job, my home. And then once you've knocked all those out, maybe do 3 to 5 a day. Then after you've knocked out all the low hanging fruit, then make it a little bit more difficult. I'm grateful for my clothes. I'm thankful for these friends that I've known since 3rd grade. I'm grateful for this. And then once you've exhausted those, then do the tougher ones, like the sore muscle ones. Like, this is a negative. How do I reframe this into a positive?
I'm just curious, as therapists, have you ever encountered a patient that has never been able to identify one thing that they're grateful for? Just really honestly curious about this.
Yeah, or it's taken time for them to come to that place where if you ask them the first time, they would absolutely say there's nothing to be grateful for.
Sure.
And then it took some time, yes.
And you said it took some time. So through time and through therapy, reframing, all the things, all the magic and all the wonderful things that you teach and provide, they were able to begin to open up to the possibility that there is something to be grateful for?
Sure. I think that it can be tough, especially with my specialty in trauma, but in every section there is gratitude for sure. But I think obviously we'll get to a point where those higher level pieces of like, I'm grateful for the trauma that I've dealt with. That takes a tremendous amount of work, although people do get there. My takeaway in that, or the approach of compassion regarding gratitude, is in the time that you are developing this practice of gratitude and practicing it, I go back to the sort of Cinderella effect of trusting or knowing that you are worth it to do, even if you don't feel the connection yet, or the true benefits of that. To know that although you were not invited to feel grateful, or it felt like you were not invited, or it doesn't come to you very quickly, like anything else, to kind of be as compassionate and open, and knowing all of the challenges and barriers that get from point A to point B. Like, I think anything in therapy, there's always poses its individual challenges and barriers. And I would add too, I mean, I don't know if if you came from an authoritarian household where you were told like, be grateful. It also can come off as a command. And then it's really kind of missing I'd say the magic of mindfulness, but actually the mindfulness in the art of gratitude.
Those people that I've encountered that wasn't like a legitimate psychopathology, the ones that just like could not, quote unquote, could not find anything to be grateful for, it's usually not always, intentional resistance. And it could be from like a sense of like, if I allow myself to let them know that I'm grateful for this, then that might mean that I don't deserve to suffer over here, or there might be some secondary gains to their suffering, or there's a need for validation and support that they only get through this appearance of suffering. So if I acknowledge something good that's happening, then I'll get less validation and support over here. So that's really the majority of the time when I've encountered that, because there's very rarely, if ever, like zero things to be grateful for.
But that's a good point. That's sort of like that initial fear-based reaction.
Yeah.
To answer your question, should gratitude ever be forced? And for me, it feels like it's in the wrong spirit when gratitude is forced. I don't think that true gratitude is a forced intention or behavior or action, the gift that you give yourself.
So many great contributions from our panel. I absolutely loved that last little nugget from Claudio about how gratitude is a gift that we give ourselves. It's free and available to most all of us, and the return or benefit is often far greater than the effort required to practice it. Today, we learned that gratitude helps us be content, to recognize what is quote-unquote good enough in our lives, so we're not imprisoned by the things or ideals that we might be striving for or clinging to, whether consciously or unconsciously. Gratitude can be an attitude or a frame of mind that we tap into throughout the day, but it requires the art of remembering in some sense, and having the ability and space to be able to find the time to stay balanced in our lives and to be okay with being okay. Honestly, it almost boils down to gratitude as the art of being mindful and accepting of life itself, and not putting, as Patrick said, all of our happiness eggs into one basket. Today we learned also that in the process of being grateful, we need to be aware of the role that privilege and ego may or may not be playing in our own perspectives and our own approach to gratitude. And as Claudia suggested, pausing amidst the stream of things, seeing and receiving, tapping into an orientation of interconnectedness and being aware of the implicit expectations that we have, most likely, of the world and what we believe the world expects of us. And please remember that if you struggle to find anything to be grateful for in your life, we do recommend counseling as a great way to dig deeper into the barriers that may be holding you back, not just from gratitude itself or mindfulness, but from much of what life has to offer. And we hope to see you next week as we explore the idea of bearing witness, which again is a concept introduced to us by Christina. We hope to see you next week. Have a great one.